Welcome to Lesson 2. In this lesson, we'll cover how all the pieces move. Just a quick review from the last part of Lesson 1. The king can move one square in any direction. Up, down, left, right, diagonal. The pawn can move one or two squares straight ahead on its first move, but only one square straight ahead after that. Now let's begin to learn how the knight moves. Knight movement forms the capital letter L using a 2 and then 1 pattern. It is the only piece that does not move in a straight line. It can jump over other pieces, but only captures pieces on the square where it lands. It will take some practice to recognize all the choices you have with your knight. Notice when the knight is towards the middle of the board, it can cover a total of 8 squares. The pattern is formed by starting where the knight sits, going up 2 squares, and then going 90 degrees to the left or to the right. Or you could start at the knight and go sideways 2 squares, and then move up or down 1 square. Additionally, you can start by going down 2 squares, and again turning 90 degrees to the left or to the right. Again, the total number of squares when the knight is towards the middle of the board that it can reach is 8. Notice if we shift the knight to the corner of the board, it can only reach 2 squares. So strategically, you're going to want your knights more towards the middle of the board to help you control more space of the board. Generally, the person controlling more space has a greater advantage in the game. Doesn't mean you're going to win, but in general, you want to try to control more space. In order to do this with knights, you generally won't want them on the outer edges of the board. We'll shift our focus now to the bishop. The bishop, when in the middle of the board, can move to a total of 13 squares. It can keep moving along its path until it reaches another piece or the edge of the board. If it reaches one of its opponent's pieces, then you have the opportunity to capture it. We'll talk more about capturing in the next lesson. But know when a bishop is towards the middle of the board, it can reach 13 squares. Notice a bishop that starts on a dark colored square will always stay on a dark colored square. If a bishop is placed in the corner of the board and has its maximum range, it only can reach 7 squares. So, like the knight, the bishop would prefer to be closer to the middle of the board to maximize its range of motion. The rook presents us with one of the simplest movement patterns. It can move up and down, or it can move left and right until it reaches another piece or the edge of the board. If a rook's in the corner of the board, notice that it can go 7 squares horizontally or 7 squares vertically, for a total of 14 squares. A unique aspect about the rook is that from the middle of the board, it can still reach 14 squares, just as many as it could when it was in the corner of the board. This unique aspect about the rook allows it to be a long-range attacking piece. Its movement is not hindered when standing in the corner of the board. It's important to recognize this, that you don't have to fight up close with rooks. In general, try to keep them further away from your opponent's pieces to avoid them from being attacked. From this example, we can see why the queen is the most powerful piece in the game. The king is the most valuable, but the queen is by far the most powerful. Here we can see the queen has a reach of 27 squares when in the middle of the board. She can move up and down, left and right, and diagonally. It's the combination of a rook and a bishop put together in its extremely powerful package. When placing the queen in the corner of the board, it does create a limitation. While the queen from the middle can reach 27 squares, in the corner she can only reach 21. Still incredibly powerful from the corner, but it is a limitation, and the queen would rather be closer to the middle of the board to get maximum range of motion and control as much space as possible. So as a recap, rooks can fight from the corner and reach as many squares as they can from the middle of the board. So as a tendency, you want to keep them away from their opponent's pieces and use them as long-range weapons. Knights, bishops, and queens are all served best by being more towards the middle of the board to maximize control of space. The king, you don't want your king out in the front. You want him protected towards the back side of the board, away from his opponent's pieces. Towards the end of the game, you can mobilize your king if some of your other pieces have been lost, but that's towards the end of the game. In the beginning and middle of the game, focus on protecting your king and keeping him safe.